deal with. There's a lot of forest fires, a lot of fires going on. Is those fires still going?
I think so. I'm not sure. I mean, I'm sure to some degree. I mean, like it was a whole. Yeah, it was like a whole thing. Like, I mean, like people had to be evacuated, and people left their cars, and
Wow.
it was like a different form of a terrorist attack. You got the thing is, you got to realize like the the situation here, like so today, the day they set the fires is the day of celebrating Israeli Independence Day. So by setting the fires, they disrupted the whole all events.
Wow.
Yeah, it's that deep. Like
So
I
they
just like
interrupted the service.
it's just like it's on that level. It's of like that petty, where it's like I'm gonna mess your day up, and we're gonna start like wildfires. Not that it's gonna do anything other than disrupt.
Wow, man, that's
Yeah,
deep.
yeah, exactly. All right, so okay, so anyways, so just like a small idea on Israeli Independence Day. So that's what's going on right now. And as you guys know, there's like a lot of fires and craziness is always, happening, but one of the ideas to keep in mind is, so we have Yom Ha'atzmaut and Yom Zikaron, right? And so we have the day before this was the day of remembrance, where we remember all of the fallen soldiers and all the things that happened. And then we have Yom Ha'atzmaut, which is, Israeli Independence Day, right? So the thing is, if we remember back, maybe I think Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, Chief Lord Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, touched on this, but it was this idea of understanding that in the beginning of creation, when God first created the world, that He started the world. He says, "Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim va'aretz." In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and then the next verse He says, "Ve haaretz hayata tohu v'vuhu ve'choshech." Right, and so He says, and then the next verse is saying how the world was created, and it was in chaos and darkness and these different types of things. And so so that was creation. And then the verse after it says that there's darkness and chaos and confusion, tohu vuhu. The next verse is Vayomer Elohim ve'ahi or ve'ahi or. Right? And God said, let there be light and let there be light. So there's this idea of creation of like chaos, and then this process of the revealment of the light. And so he parallels that to the concept of of Exodus, towards the end of Exodus, right? When they build the Mishkan. He says before they build the Mishkan, he says that it was chaos, right? It was like they're building the golden calf. Wasn't coming. It was a whole matzav. It was a whole like crazy situation, right? And then you had that, and then right after that, the same exact process that build the golden calf in terms of collecting items and all these things. That similar process was happened right after that when Moshe came down. He wasn't a part of the chaos, but when he came down with the light. And that light, that Ve'ahi Or, before the Tohu Vuhu, came down and he said, what? And he says that, hey, let's create order. Let's build a place that God could actually dwell, not the chaos, not through this process of chaos and panic. And so when we look at the Israeli that's going on right now, we have Yom Zikaron, which is a day of of it was yesterday, which was the day of remembrance of all the fallen soldiers. And we think about like what all these soldiers are dying, what's going on. The fact that there's a Jewish nation that exists today, that the fact that there's Jews today, there should be like an idea that existed in the Bible thousands of years ago. The fact that we are existing in it today, right? Like we can't find the Phoenicians and all these other nations that the Torah speaks about. We can't find any of them. I mean, we can find relics, these things, but like alive like living entity, giving birth, creating children, the same culture, the same idea, the same system of thought, or similar at least. Like we're witnessing that right now, right? There's Jews right now that are excited and motivated about the concept of Israel, right? This guy Jacob, he's wrestling with an angel. He gets the name Israel, right? And then God says this land is, for your descendants. All right, land of Israel. Right now, 2025, we're here trying to establish borders, establish Torah to whatever level we can, waiting for Mashiach, the whole thing right now. So you have Yom Zikaron, which is the Day of Remembrance, which is in a frame like, why do these soldiers have to die? Why does this happen? This is in a frame of Tohu Vuhu. This is part of the darkness, right? Al Pineh, right? That the darkness, the face of darkness is on the earth, right? You have that, and then the next day is what? The independence, and that's where we're at right now. We're in this concept of independence, and this whole concept, and this whole thing. So, with that being said, that's here on a national level. And some people, there's a lot of Jews right now that aren't connected to this. When I first came to Israel, I didn't know. I mean, I knew about it, but it wasn't such a thing by where the environment that I was in, right? And so now, um, you know, but now, I've grown. I've seen a much broader Israel, a much greater Israel, and so that part of that Israel is, it's this idea, like, it's a real thing. There's families, entire communities that their children went off the war, and some of those kids didn't come back. And the people who went to war and didn't come back, if it wasn't for them, I mean, I wouldn't be able to be here and learn Torah in the holiest place in the world. I wouldn't be able to do the things that I do, if it wasn't for that. So it's like that's reality. You say, oh well, well, there's kids, people dying in war in Gaza, the kids. But it's like, you think the Israelis want to kill Jews? I mean, the Israelis want to kill, babies. Do they want to? You really think that's the mindset, or is the enemy the enemy they're fighting against is using children as a form of defense, as a cannon fodder? To say no, we want you to kill these children because then we could go out and do a political thing and we could raise billions of dollars that goes in our pockets mostly, and the people never seen any of it, and the money that does go into the community goes to buy more weapons and defense. It's not what the per se the Palestinian people want. They're subjugated. If they say no, these people will kill them too. Right, so it's just all right. Well, the news doesn't say it like that. The news, the Israelis are baby killers. They want to kill. All right, fine. That's what the news say. I get it. But who's paying for that? Who's paying for that special? Who's paying for that ad? Who's paying for that information? Who's lobbying for that particular position? Oh, it's called propaganda. All right, so propaganda. So, anyways, so that's what we're dealing with here, and it's a reality, and I have a lot of friends, it's like, oh man, we had Shabbat plans. They're like, I don't know if we're going to do Shabbat at my house because I just got called up. So I don't know, something big's about to happen in Gaza. And they're calling up a lot of the soldiers. A lot of soldiers are getting called up. So we'll see what happens. But the point is just saying that it's an unbelievable situation. And, have the situation with the United States and Iran. I mean, that's a whole issue. I mean, we got to know what's going on. World politics, it's a real thing. So this whole thing in Iran is a big deal. It looks like America and Britain, they're doing joint efforts in Yemen. I know you guys already know what's going on in Yemen, right? But they're doing joint efforts there. It's a precursor, it looks like, to Iran. And yeah, but what are you supposed to do? Iran becomes, a nuclear power. Your life in America, it's over. You know what I'm saying? Like, Americans don't realize, they don't understand what instability is, right? They don't understand that, these people in other parts of the world, they're trying to create currency that would devalue the United States currency, right? Like, we are the world, Shana, we are the children. Okay, you can believe like that, but these people over in other parts of the world want to eat your lunch. They despise everything about you. They despise your way of living. They despise the fact that you guys all could go on a public transportation from different religions and different outlets, and you guys could ride together without any control from a particular religion. They don't, Americans don't understand it. They don't understand that, people in the Middle East, like in Gaza, they will use a whole civilian population, and say we're gonna attack the Israelis, and then when the Israelis come to response, we're gonna go underground. But the civilians that had nothing to do with what we did are gonna have to stay on top, and they're gonna have to receive the brunt of Israel's response. And then we could say, "Hey, Israel killed all these civilians," and then we could go out and raise money for it. See, Americans don't understand that. They don't understand that. They understand gang violence. They understand, people having problems with each other. They don't understand sacrificing millions of people for death for a political agenda. Americans don't understand. Anyways, the point is saying that it's a very difficult time for the Jewish people. All around the world, Jews are being attacked, and the reality is that this dynamic as it relates to Iran, which they're going to blame Israel for. They're going to say, "Oh, what Israel drug America into this war with Iran." That's what they're going to say, right? But the reality is like this: Israel is just an extension of America, right? Iran gets a nuclear weapon. That means that the United States will no longer have the ability to dictate what happens in this region. That means that all the terrorist proxies that are all around the world, not just in Yemen and in Lebanon and the south of Israel and Gaza, these other places. No, in Africa, we hear about all these Christians being killed, by no, it's not El Shabazz, what do they call it? Whatever they call Boko Haram, all these different types of people. Who do you think that's all Iran, right? And all throughout Africa, right? Somalia, all these places. That's coming from Iran. They're funding all these activities because they see this as resistance against the West. So killing Christians, killing Jews, killing anybody who's not a part of their ideology, even other Muslims, it's okay because they're resisting and that's their jihad, right? So that's anyway. So I don't want to make so much a thing about it right now, but when we talk about Israeli Independence Day and we're talking about like what is the 77th year, we just have to really keep in mind of just saying that like, hey, the West, has a problem with the country, a minority country. Normally, if Jews are in this is the bottom line, and I'll leave it on this point. The way that the Muslims understand territory and the way that the Western world understands it are two different things. Muslims understand territory and say if Muslims conquered it at some point in its history, it's Muslim land forever. The West says, well, it has to do with who owns property, who owns the deed, who the legal system. Muslims don't care about that. So from that, the Muslims in this region, okay, I'm not saying Muslims as a whole, but I'm saying Muslims in this region do not under thinking that way. So when it came to the dividing the land, when the United Nations gave some of the land to Israel and some of the land to the Arabs said we reject it and we don't. You have no ability to give our land. We conquered this land. This is our land. And the United Nations says, well, the British conquered it from you guys, and then they allowed us to distribute it to you guys, for humanitarian purposes. And so they said the Arabs said, no, we don't accept anything from you guys. The Jews say yes. Boom, the state of Israel is created. The Arabs don't have anything. Right. And that went on for decades and decades and decades. And now they say, oh, we want a two-state solution. All right. But Israel's giving you options for two-state solution, right? Right. 13 times since the 1930s, right? To now. Right? 13 times. So they rejected it. So, okay, so they rejected it. Why they rejected it? Because the Palestinian people themselves, the concept was created in the 1960s by the Russians, right? After the Six-Day War in the 1960s by Israel, when they started defeating the Egyptians and everyone else, they said, hey, we got to create a Palestinian people. And if we have a people that are Palestinian, then we could go and say, okay, well, we could go to the United Nations and say, okay, well, we need territory for our people. They created it, 1960s. They created it. Look it up. It's not me. They created the Palestinian people. Before then, these people were known as Jordanians. Trans Jordan. That's what these people are. There's stories of people saying, I went to sleep Palestinian, I wake up, no, I went to sleep Jordanian, I woke up Palestinian. So that's what this whole thing is. So, anyways, we're going to move past that. We're going to go into the Torah. We're going to learn some Torah. We're going to learn Chofetz Chaim. We're going to stay in this place of the fixing of Lashon Hara. And this dynamic of fixing Lashon Hara is, is connected to the protection for this this month of ER and being able to do that. And we have the Torah portions, the whole thing. All right, so let's go into it. But we sometimes we just got to talk about Israel. We got to talk about Israel. We got to defend Israel. We got to understand what it is, Israel, because this is our homeland, no matter what. Okay, so it says Asur lesaper leshon hara al haverot af shehu emet. He said, it is forbidden to speak Lashon Hara against one's friends, even if it's true. Wait, hold on. Yeah, this is it. Even if it's true, I don't know. They're saying similar to this in the first part. So I guess it's like the whole concept. Okay, it's forbidden to speak Lashon Hara against one's friend, even if it is true, even before one, and more so before many, in the more listeners, the greater the sin of the speaker, if for the friend is greatly demeaned, thereby his taint being publicized before several people. Also, in doing so, he makes several people go astray on the Israel listening lashon. Okay, so I guess we kind of knew that already. So it says Uma she nim tzad hatar bidaber chazal chazal lomer bifeni shelosha. So he says, as to there being found a heter, like a halakhic permission in the words of Hazal to speak it before three people, this applies to something that which is not an absolute taint and which can be understood in two ways. It is well known that such a thing depends on how they're said. So they're saying, like, basically that they just brought up this idea of if it's said in front of seven people, it's a big issue. And now they're bringing up this idea that if a person says something in front of only three people, it's not at the same status. So we're going to try to understand that. Okay, so he says basically it's known how you said it. He says it is such a thing that Hazal permitted to say in the presence of three, the rational being, that since he said it is before three, he knows for a certainty that these things will come to his object ear. So the person he's talking about is going to hear about it. He says the speaker therefore heeds himself in speaking that what he says will not be understood negatively. So he's saying it in a certain way, like, it's not demeaning the person, but he's speaking on the issue. He says, let one illustration serve for all cases of the same kind. Okay, so they're bringing an example. If one, he says, here's a scenario. If one is asked, where is fire found? He answers, you can find it there where they always cook flesh and fish. So basar and fish, meat and fish. He says this can be understood accordingly to how it is said at the time. If he wishes, he can say it in such a tone that contains no taint against his friend. For in truth, there is sometimes no fault in this. It
You kind of breaking up, Rabbi.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me okay or no?
Yeah, no, you good now.
Okay, perfect. All right, so yeah, thank you for that because it's like it's hard for me to know what's going. All right, so he's bringing an example. He's saying, so basically he's talking about this idea of if you're saying something in front of three people and you're saying something about someone else that doesn't necessarily, it's not speaking evil speech or it's not condemning or any type of way, you know, it's somehow it's at a different status. And I'm reading this as we go. She says it's at a different status that if you said the same exact thing in front of 7 people. All right, so they're making a difference between it being in front of a small group versus a lot of people. Why? I guess we'll find out. All right. So if it breaks up again, please let me know. So he says, all right. He says, so he brings an example. He says, okay, a person asks where there's fire. He says it's at this particular place. He says this can be understood according to how it is said at the time. If he wishes, he can say it in such a tone that contains no taint against his friend. For in truth, there is sometimes no fault in this. It may be that he has a large family and that the Holy One, blessed be he, has blessed him with wealth, or that he is in an innkeeper or the like, and that or that when the speaker is asked where fire is to be found, the answer is quite appropriately that there is no fire to be found now except in that house where there's always cooking happening, etc. All of these things in the category of dust of Lashon Ra depends on how they are expressed at the time. But if the tone of his voice and the movement is that he the proprietor the owner of the house or the inn overindulges in feasting, then even though this is not an absolute taint, Chazal terms it as dust of Lashon Ra, and it is forbidden to say it is even in the presence of three. Okay, so it's a very interesting point. So he's saying like this. He's saying that when we're speaking, it's all about the tone and the connotation, and we know that. You know, we all speak, especially in English. You know, we know the way that we say things and the tone we say things. You know, is like like someone says something right, and they walk away. And you're like, yeah, sure. Now, if you wrote down, yeah, sure, it would sound like you're agreeing, right? You're agreeing with this person. But yeah, sure, in this concept, it's like you're being sarcastic. You're saying I don't really believe you, even though you claim to be certain in your position, right? And so you have that dynamic, right? And so you have that. So he's saying the tone, but there is a difference between saying in front of a small group of people versus saying in three. So he's saying when it comes to saying in front of a small group, there's a certain leniency, right? Why this whole thing? That's a whole conversation. But there's a leniency of of saying something versus in front of a bigger crowd, right? And he says in the bigger crowd, I guess there's even less of a thing. Okay, so wait, this make sure. Okay, so that's it. So there's this idea that maybe a person is not speaking, total Lashon Hara, but I guess there's this concept that they call dust of Lashon Hara. Oh, no, I'm saying I'm drinking some water. They're great. Like that is great. Like I maybe have in America, but they have this like electrolyte water. Anyways, all right. So it says like this. You got that?
No, I just said I may.
So it says una sayir daver echad. So all right. So this is guys second part. Whoa. So he's saying like this. He says there are some who may say that if one speaks demeaningly of his friend before three, even though he certainly transgressed the Israel Lashon Ra, as mentioned above, still, if one of the three who heard this thing told it therefore to others, he does not thereby transgress the Isser of Lashon Ra by reason of the fact that if three know of it, the thing has been heard and becomes known to all of them. For your friend has a friend, etc. And the Torah did not forbid Lashon Ra, something which is bound to be known. And this is so only if it relates by chance, but not if he intends to spread and publicize it more. And he says even if he does not relate this, even if he does not relate in the same name of the one who told him, so that there is no rikilut. He says, but casually, to the effect that there is such that was heard about, so and so. He still may not escape the Isra of Lashon Ra. Okay, so he's saying so. Okay, so he's bringing. So he's basically going into a particular detail about speaking Lashon Ra, and he's saying that if there is an idea that if you say something only amongst three people, it has a lesser of a status of speaking Lashon Ra as it does seven people, right? And it also matters if the subject that you're talking about is going to be known anyway. So, like, say for example, like you hear about someone getting divorced, right? So it's like, okay, so you tell your friend, oh, so and so is getting divorced. So the question is that Lashon Ra, right? Is that, are you speaking negative about somebody? Well, they say, well, it's one of those things where that the community is going to find out about it. You're just saying it at this particular time. Maybe you know it earlier, maybe you know it later, whatever, blah blah blah. But this is the thing. All right. So it says part four. Ve'afilu ma sheitar sheitarnu ba'im no mikaven legalot. It says even our heter, our permission to repeat this to another, there is no intent to publicize it. Applies, he says applies only to the first, permission of a person. Okay, so he says there is possible to get a permission. So say like you come to your rabbi and you say, "Hey, rabbi, I want to be able to talk about this particular issue, but I don't want it to be lashon hara. But I'm only going to say it to a couple of people, and these are the reasons why." You can get what they call a heter from your rabbi. Your rabbi can say, "You know what? I looked at the laws, and you're not violating this and this and this," and then you have a heter to do this, right? So the rabbi thing is a very powerful thing as relates to halacha, because he can give you guidance on how to keep it based off of what you're dealing with, right? So he says by this dynamic that you have this there is a heter to do that, right? So he's saying even if you have a heter, he says, and though even our heter to repeat this to another, there is no intent to publicize it, right? So you get a heter for that. It applies only to the first heter, who himself heard that Reuben said about Shimon in the presence of three, but he who heard it from him is forbidden to thereafter on the authority that his having been told that he heard it in the presence of three, and to tell another of a taint he heard um, attributed to Shimon, even if he does not mention who it is that told him this slander against Shimon, unless the thing were publicized and became known to all. This applies not only when the second hearer does not himself know whether the allegations of himself that Reuben's slander against Shimon is true, which in which the instance he certainly is forbidden to believe him. his informer. Reuben transgresses the Isser of Lashon Hara. But even if he knows that Reuben spoke demeaningly of Shimon, he does not know if he did so in the presence of three. In spite of this, he is forbidden to rely on his words to this effect. And and we fear that perhaps that it was not in the presence of three, that it is not bound to become public knowledge. Therefore, the second here is forbidden to tell anyone. All right. So basically, like it's this idea, like he's going basically going in depth in the halacha of how to deal with lashon hara, right? So there's an idea that says that like if someone is in the presence of three people and their rabbi gives them permission to say it, they have a heter to say it in front of three people, right? But the person, one of those three people who heard it, if they say it to another person, then they fall under this rabbinical decree of speaking Lashon Hara because they weren't given permission. And the person who's listening also is going to receive this dynamic because he doesn't know if he's one of those three people or or the dynamic, so he has it basically blocked the whole thing out. It says Nira Eli Deim Hasapur Be'efe Haya. So he says, it seems to me that if the recounting on the presence of three were before God, fearing men whose guard themselves against the prohibition of Lashon Hara, then, as a matter of course, this report is bound not to be heard, and if so, it is forbidden by Torah law to repeat it afterwards to another. And even if only one of the three of God-fearing men guard himself against the Israel of Lashon Hara, the din remains the same. They are no longer three potential publicizers, and if B, that this is the din if one of the three were relative or a close friend of the object of the slander. The same rationale applies here, for he certainly will not go and reveal to all the taints of his relatives or his close friends, so that they are not three potential publicizers who are present. It's a whole big subject. Anyways, do you have any ideas, any points, any thoughts on anything, any questions? Because I just feel like it's very technical. And the thing is, what he's not talking about here is the concept of the rabbinical court and how the idea of having three witnesses or two witnesses and the significance of people saying things and other people hearing about it. Like he's not saying that, he's just kind of like jumping into it. So is there any thoughts, any points on this, whatever, as we go to number 6?
No, no, I don't have any points at this time.
Mm. All right, so it says, Nira Eli de Davacha. So he says like this. He says, it also seems to me that only in a city in which the report was heard in the presence of three, it is permitted to reveal it on the basis of your friend has a friend. But in a different city, even if there is communication between the two, he says, so see, he's asking to see this other point. So he's going on these other points. Okay, so he says, he keeps going. ואם האומר הזכיר שלא לגלותו אפילו אומר בפני רבים. So he says, if a speaker extorts the hearers not to reveal it, even if he says it before many, the Isra Lashon Hara obtained for the one who reveals it afterwards, even by chance. And even if he sees that one of the hearers or two did not heed this extortion and revealed what he heard to the other in spite of this, the third one may not reveal the thing to another even by chance. So he's just going through different scenarios of how evil speech and who's liable, who's not liable, why they're liable. He says he says chiluk beishan belashon hazara the bein shasivam. So he says there's no difference in the language of the extorting, whether he's extorted them not to mention the subject at all anymore, or whether he said to them, "Let none of this be known by you. In all modes, it is forbidden to reveal the demeaning of another, even to a different person. How much more so to the person demeans himself? For if it is revealed to another, in the end it will become known to all, even though to him the person demeaned through the channel of your friend has a friend, etc. is also obvious that the heter giving the permission only applies that the hearers were three, as opposed to an instance of two who spoke before two, where this is heter does not apply. So we'll just keep going. So he says Vikol ze shedabarenu lahu mi sada isur. And he says, in all of this we have said applies to the Isser of repeating it, but God forbid to add even one word or two to the in border, to the thing before the hearer. It's very technical. And he says that what is said against Shimon was very well said, and the like, that this certainly is forbidden in all modes, for he therefore harms him with the words more than he would have been harmed had he himself heard the original report within the normal dynamic of. And he says, and furthermore, this is added to the original, and it is clear that he accepted the reports as true, and is forbidden by the poskim in all modes that explain below. So again, he's going on this point. I think it's going to be more clear as we keep going, but basically, this idea of he's creating a mechanism where he's saying like, hey, there is an idea that you can say certain things that are important, that affect people's lives, to a small group of three people if you give permission. But now he's saying, but now what does that happen when that other people go and speak it out, or if you speak it to less than those people, or the person who hears it, how do they respond, right? All right. Too much. Okay, no, no, too much. Oh, so he says, "Ve'alakin sirik le me'od." So he says, and therefore one must take great heed, even if a man is known to have a certain fault in his youth. But so someone says something about somebody you may know. He says, but from until now he has been um, conducting himself correctly, or if he is known about his forebears that he did not conduct himself correctly at all, but he does not hold on to those ways. And in all such things, he says, in all such things, where in truth he does not open to aspiration, it is forbidden to demean him or to shame him before his friends because of his earlier faults. So if you know something about, somebody, so if you know something about somebody, Yeah. So he says if you know something about yeah if you know something about somebody and you hear someone speaking gossip about them, but you know about like these habits from this person, from earlier, like in their life. You know what I mean? Like somebody used to like maybe they used to steal money maybe back in the day or something like this, and they used to do it, but someone else is trying to bring them up, right, and try to like accuse them or say bad about them. So he says like this. Oh, he says, therefore one must take great heed, even if a man is known to have a certain fault in his youth, for from then until now he has been conducting himself correctly, or is known about his forebears, in that he did not conduct himself correctly at all, but he has not done, but he does not hold on to those their ways, in all which, so even if like a person comes from like a shady family or something like this, he says, in all such things where in truth he does not open, it is forbidden to demean him or to shame him before his friends because of his earlier faults. So if someone comes from a shady family or they did shady things themselves, you should not ever use that against him in the future. He says, and one who transgresses and speaks about these things to another, even if not on his presence, in order to shame him in the eyes of his people, even if he adds nothing to the truth, is in the case of the speaker of Lashon Hara, who does not behold the divine presence as stated in the Shari Tshuva. We read Shari Tshuva. So, so he's saying that's a big thing. He's saying like, so if you know somebody who, he's switching the conversation a little bit, right? So he's saying if you know somebody who came from a family of thieves, I'm just using thieves as an example. His family, his parents were thieves, his cousins, his siblings are thieves. You can't use that against him or use that as a way to evaluate him if you know he's not a part of that or he's changed his ways. Or a person used to be a thief, right? And they changed their ways. You can't use that against them. He says, and the heter of does not apply in which such a instance, and even if the thing is known is known to all, since in truth the object of report bears no blemish in this. It is written in Ezekiel. I can't say anything in English. He says, the son shall not bear the sins of his father, and the wicked one, when he turns from all of his sins which he has done, all of the sins which he has done shall not be reckoned upon him in his righteousness, and in the righteousness which has done shall he live. And he who does not bring these things up to him renders him mockery in the mouth of men. So anyways, the point is just saying the Torah does not believe in making mockery of people of who they were before. When a person repents, right? When a person says, "Hey, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm doing this whole thing." When they make that decision, when they make that decision, that is the transformation, and you have to honor that. You can't use that against them, right? And you can't say it because, oh well, everyone knows. Anyway, so it says dad od de ha ha term de afe tilatahu. So he says, and also know, and know also that the entire heter, the permission from whatever your rabbi is, applies to the speaker. But as far as the hearer is concerned, that is, if he knows the nature of the hearer to be such that as soon as he hears the report, he will accept it as truth against Shimon and may even add some demeaning things against him. To the man like this, it is forbidden to emanate anything demeaning about his frame and form. So if you know like two people aren't getting along, right? like like okay, like Reuben and Shimon, like they're not getting along. They used to be good friends, but now they're not getting along. And so you have a problem with Shimon. So if you go to Reuben and you say something in such a way, even if it's in a small group or even if you have permission to say it, and you know that he's going to run with that and be like, "Oh my God, I hate this guy. It's so true what you're saying. I got to tell everybody." He says, "Forbidden to tell him." Okay. It says so. It says like it says in Vayikra, before the blind man, do not take, do not make a stumbling block. So if you know someone's a hater, don't get them a situation to hate on somebody. He says, as we have explained above in the introduction, in relation to this negative commandment, he says in all that we have written concerning this principle, in the direction of the Isser applies even if this speaker did not mention the name of the first speaker, who spoke in the presence of three, but only stated that this was what he heard about so and so, even though even thus it was forbidden after all of the things that this truth that we have explained, see my brother, how much one must distance himself from this leniency of, he said, anyways, he says which is practically no place in reality, and especially even if all the conditions for the leniencies obtained, it is to be determined whether the halakha is consistent with this opinion of leniency, since according to many poskim there is no source for the leniency in the Talmud, which is written. All right, it says, therefore one must guard. Therefore, one must guard his soul and will distance himself from this. All right, hold on. Okay, so we'll keep going. All right. So we're still going on the whole process. It says Vehine lifi ma sheba arenu be'azerat Hashem. He says, and now according to what we have explained, with the help of, hold on. Okay, hold on. Okay. All right. So we're going back. Okay. All right. Okay. So it says. He says, and now according to what we have explained, with the help of God, the blessed be He, the principle that we have just realized that we must be taking that when the seven cities of the dignitaries preside over the actions of men of the city in matters of assessment in the like, where their judgment will be to the detriment of one and to the benefit of another, and they differ in opinion and decide according to the majority. When they leave the communal chamber, one must take great heed not to relate thereafter his opinion or the opinion of so and so, to the effect that in the beginning of the case his opinion has to be lenient with the man involved, but this, I know this is so technical, I understand it, but his colleagues overrule him and compel him to accept another view. And then it goes without saying that if they agree among themselves from the beginning that when they left the communal chambers that they would not receive or relate their deliberations to the man involved in in the debt. I don't know how we got here. And he says, and it goes without saying that if he says so, this is would be an absolute, isser, like a transgression. But even if quite casually, without intending to reveal anything, he happened to tell to another, in such a manner to make the appearance for this words that he did not incline to this, the majority opinion even now, but if he could not contest it with another, this too is an absolute issur. And according to Al-Haki opinion. So he's just coming with these different scenarios of Lashon Hara, right? And we have to like understand, like he's not speaking straightforward. He's saying he's giving a scenario. And he's saying if this were to happen in this scenario, or that is to happen in this scenario, this is the response. So he's saying that in a situation, even in the court situation, right? He says
You
even if.
know,
Go ahead. Go ahead.
the more and more that you read into this, what it seems like, it's kind of like just from my own understanding, it's almost like you have a leadership. Okay, so someone in leadership. All right, so it could be a rabbi, be a minister, whoever, just a leader, and a person comes to them in confidentiality about a particular matter about themselves, something that they may have done or something they're struggling with, right? And that leader helps them with that situation, help them to overcome it. Well, a few years later down the road, that same leader may be at an event where they see that person and their family is there and everything, and just casually talking, and they say, hey, I remember, hey, so are y'all excited about what he or she overcame, that drug addiction or that thing, and everybody's looking like, what? You know, it's kind of like you 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 assume that because this is family or another friend, that they know the situation, and it's kind of like that's evil speech, because that was something that wasn't supposed to be shared.
Exactly. No, no, that's exactly it right there. Just these are different case studies of going into understanding like how we communicate. How we communicate information, how we communicate about others. Just like as you beautifully said, like in this particular situation, but the case itself should give us a cognitive sensitivity to many other scenarios that we're engaged in. She says that even if one relates casually that it was his opinion in the beginning to being lenient with the man involved, and it came to a vote that his decided accordingly to the majority, this too is forbidden. He said there is no difference between whether one reveals this to his own volition or to his friend, rise up against him with insults over this decision, which they arrived at in a certain manner. He says in all instances it is forbidden to place the onus on the responsibility on his colleagues and remove it from him, even what he's saying is true. Oh, the re'iti li katov lidaber echad beferush mifene. He says, I have found. This is on like perspective. I have found it. I have found also. I have also found it fitting to write of another thing explicitly. For I have found that many people I have found many people to be habituated to it. That is, when someone lectures in the house of a study, it is forbidden according to the din to mock him or to say that there is nothing to his lecture and there is nothing to hear. So he said he's found out that there's a thing like I guess he's saying in Torah communities or in communities, there's a thing that where people will mock the lecturer who comes. And he says, and in the many sins we see people be remiss in this. And he says, but not considering this mocking is an issur at all. According to the judgment, it is absolute Lashon Hara. And through such speech, it often happens that he causes monetary loss to his friends, and sometimes pain and shame too. She said the people who do this it affects their money. It affects their money, and it affects your safety and embarrassment. And he says, even if the guy is a lame speaker, he says, for what benefits does the mocker and the jesters hope to gain by this, levity? Like, you're making fun of somebody. What are you going to gain from it at the end of the day? And if he's a sincere person, to the contrary, should counsel him the lecturer afterwards and prior. So if you really see that the person is really struggling or not saying something accurate, should talk to him in private, afterwards in private, and suggest another way to present his lecture. For in the president's approach mockery, his words are not attended to, and by this above counsel to the lecture, it would also fulfill he would also fulfill Vayikra, what it says, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. In any event, you should not render him mockery in the mouth of men. In the heter is there's no avail here. It's clearly explained in. Okay, all right. So he's going into a different part of the chapter. So we're going to stop here. So the thing is like this. So he's going through different scenarios, right? He's going through different scenarios. It's kind of a unique thing because we're talking about speaking and speaking correctly, and this idea of speaking correctly and being able to turn that into a living system for ourselves, you know, is a big idea, But the thing is the responsibility of what we say and what we hear, right? That's the main concept right now. The concept. I mean, we could read the Sefer. I mean, to really get these books that we're reading, you have to read them over and over again. You know what I'm saying? Like it's just we're just opening the door now. This guy, the Ram Call, this guy, this Sefer. But these are books that for the rest of your life you're going to read and ponder, and that's what all of us do, right? That's what the whole Torah community does. These books that we call classics, we read over them and we pick up something unique on this particular read that we didn't read before. But the genius is that we're talking about the art of speaking, and we're talking about the art of speaking correctly, right? And so that's the main idea to walk away with it. That's the main idea to walk away with, right? Is this idea of that I'm speaking in a way that is pleasing to God, and I'm staying away from speech that is not pleasing to God, right? And so the details of it and the structure and how he particularly wrote this particular sefer, you got to get used to it. It's a style, and then once you understand the style more, then you'll be able to appreciate what's being said more. But the core principle you're getting now, right? And your neshama is getting it now, and your neshama is getting all the words. But in an intellectual level, because we're talking about styles of writing and different times in history and different ways of communicating, that's what we've got to adjust to. And that's the beauty of Torah learning and study, is that we have to kind of like readjust ourselves to those times. Any last points or ideas?
Yes, thank you for stating that last part there, Chief Rabbi, because I was sitting here trying to figure out like, okay, 3 people versus 7 people, and I was just going back and forth in my head, like, okay, who are these 3 people? Are they people that you give, the names to the rabbi, or you don't, or is it just like a family setting? It was a whole lot of different things just kind of going through my head about it, but ultimately, it's the main, like you said, the main thing is just to know that we're learning how to speak, and we may have to go back and read over it again in order to really just kind of take it all in. And so that kind of gave me some assurance, because I was like, what is going on here? I don't know who the people are and why the 3 versus the 7. I don't know if I got a whole lot of clarity on that portion as well, but I guess it's just, take some time and just go back and read it, because I know, like, when we're going through the Torah portion, you can go through the Torah portion year after year after year, and you're like, what? How did I don't remember reading this. And so that's what I got from it. And so just thank you for just giving us that assurance.
Yeah, it's a process, and he's writing in a unique way. You know what I mean? Like he's literally bringing like cases, you know what I mean? And there's commentaries on this that we're not reading either. You know, we're just kind of going through the text. So it's kind of like we're doing the idea, they call it Bikias, you know, where we're just kind of going through the text and like and thinking about it and reflecting on it. But then there's another level. You go back and you say, okay, what does this line mean? So he's bringing cases right now. So that's a very unique way of learning, right? Bringing cases, you know, and saying, okay, well, you had three guys, and the two of them came, and then one came. You know, it's a whole thing. So to a degree, you may even have to write it out. You know what I mean? To really understand, and that's what we would have to do normally in yeshiva. It's like when we go through these cases, okay, so and so is holding by this. This is what happened. Okay, so blah blah, blah. And then you say, okay, this is how it comes together. But either way, we're fine. But but either way, we're going through it. But the main thing is that idea of what comes in our ears and then what comes out of our mouth, you know, and being able to say like, you know, to start that process of like, well, what am I hearing? Is it connecting me to the creator, you know, and what am I saying? Is it bringing me closer to the creator or distancing me from the creator? Is it creating reality? What are my words actually saying, and how do these words impact me? So this is a very big thing in a society that we live in that doesn't put any value on what we say. You know, they act like what we say has no power. You can just say whatever you want, whatever your instincts tell you, right? And so that, you know, as Jews, we know that's not true. You know, that's for sure not true, right? The words mean everything. You create reality with words. That's why we pray 3 times a day. So, anyways, again, any last points before we closed out? Okay. Okay. All right. So yeah, we'll continue on tomorrow. Today was a little bit later, a lot later. We had the holidays, and I spoke about Israeli independence. You know, at an event today. It was a smaller event. It was like, you know, maybe 10, 15 people there, but it was a smaller event. And I just talked about the idea of the independence of mind, right? And being able to build off of that idea of independence of mind. All right. So, anyways, we'll continue on tomorrow earlier. I'll see you guys at time.